Cold Creek is a small town nestled in the dense forests of Northern California. The name sounds cold and lonely, but for the people here, it is just a part of everyday life. The forests surrounding the town are hundreds of years old. The ancient trees are silent witnesses to all the secrets buried here. Anna Marshall, a high school teacher who recently moved to Cold Creek, had never heard of this town until a few weeks ago. She found a job teaching at the local high school and decided to move here with the hope of starting a new life. Her house is located on the edge of the forest, an old wooden house with frosted glass windows and a crooked porch. The previous owner seemed to have left this place long ago. On the first day of moving in, Anna found the children in the town looking at her with curiosity and a bit of fear. When she asked a boy named Tommy about the nearby forest, the boy just muttered, "Don't go in the forest after sunset." Anna smiled, thinking it was just a childish prank. But that first night, as darkness fell and the forest became dark, she began to understand why people here avoided talking about the forest after dusk. Around midnight, a strange sound woke her. It was not the usual nighttime noise, not the buzz of insects or the wind whistling through the branches. It was a whisper, soft as a plea, coming from the forest. Anna sat up and listened. The whispers had no clear meaning, but there was an eerie rhythm to them, as if they were inviting or pleading for something. The whispers grew louder, as if they were coming closer to her house. The next day, Anna decided to find out more about the woods and what lay within. She went to the town library and met Mrs. Jenkins, an old librarian with bright eyes and deep lines on her face. "What are you looking for, Miss Marshall?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, speaking slowly. "I want to know about the woods near my house," Anna answered. "I heard strange whisperings last night." Mrs. Jenkins looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to speak. "They call it the Whispering Woods," she said softly. "There are old stories about people who go into the woods and never come back. They say the woods are cursed." Anna frowned. "Cursed? That's right," Mrs. Jenkins continued. "Back in the 1800s, a group of settlers settled nearby. They built houses and farmed, but one winter they disappeared without a trace. When the search party arrived, they found only empty houses and traces of a strange ritual performed in the woods. It was said that they had awakened something ancient and dangerous. "Something?" Anna asked, a chill running down her spine. Mrs. Jenkins just shook her head. "No one knows for sure." But then the whispers began. Anna left the library with a heavy feeling. She looked toward the woods, where the trees were tangled and blocked out the sunlight. She knew she shouldn't go there, but part of her, the part that was always curious about the unsolved, urged her to get closer to this secret. That afternoon, Anna prepared a flashlight and a pocket knife. She entered the forest as the sun began to set, the light fading between the trees. The air in the forest was cool and stifling, as if it were hiding some invisible presence. The whispers rang out again, as soft as a breath, but this time they were clearer. Anna felt as if hundreds of eyes were watching her from the darkness. She walked deeper, dry branches cracking under her feet. Suddenly, she saw a clearing in the middle of the forest, where rocks were arranged in a circle. On the rocks, strange symbols were carved deeply, like some ancient language that had been forgotten. Anna moved closer and touched one of the symbols. A cold current rushed through her body, and the whispers suddenly became frantic, urgent. The ground beneath her feet shook, and from the darkness, a shape gradually emerged. It had no shape, a twisted mass of darkness with hundreds of distorted faces, all of them open-mouthed in silent screams. Anna stepped back, her heart pounding. She felt cold hands tighten around her arms, and a deep voice spoke in her head. "You have awakened me. You belong to me now." Anna tried to pull her hand away from the invisible grip, but the more she struggled, the tighter it tightened. The faces on the mass of darkness twisted, screaming silently, as if in excruciating pain. "You cannot escape. Once you enter the circle, you are part of it." The deep voice echoed in her head, blending with the whispers of the forest. She felt her mind spinning, her thoughts in disarray. Suddenly, a memory flashed. the image of Mrs. Jenkins and what she had said about the ancient ritual. Anna looked around the circle of stones. There had to be some way to break it. With the last of her strength, she gritted her teeth, pulled the knife from her pocket, and carved one of the symbols on the stone. Immediately, the mass of darkness hissed, the faces twisted in pain. The grip on her arm loosened, and Anna fell out of the circle. She scrambled to her feet and ran, not daring to look back. The creature's furious scream echoed throughout the forest, but it could not get past the broken circle. When Anna emerged from the forest, breathing heavily, it was already dark. The small cabin appeared before her eyes, like a safe haven after a nightmare. But inside her, another fear was growing. Had she really escaped it? That night, Anna sat in the living room, her fingers tracing the hand-shaped bruise on her arm. It ached, as if a part of the creature still clung to her. Outside the window, the forest was in deep darkness. The whispers had stopped, but Anna felt an invisible presence, as if something was waiting. The doorbell rang suddenly, breaking the silence. Her heart pounded, and she hesitated before moving to the door. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice hoarse with fear. There was no answer. Anna looked through the peephole and saw Mrs. Jenkins standing there, her old eyes shining with concern. She sighed and opened the door. "Mrs. Jenkins, what brings you here at this hour?" Mrs. Jenkins did not answer immediately, just stared at Anna's bruised arm. She shook her head, her eyes shining with deep sadness. "You touched something you shouldn't have. It has marked me." Anna felt her blood run cold. "Is there any way to get rid of it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "Yes, but at a heavy price." Mrs. Jenkins led Anna into the living room and placed an old book on the table. The pages were yellowed and covered with strange characters. "This is the severing ritual. It will free you from the curse, but you must be willing to face your greatest fear." Anna flipped through the pages, her eyes lingering on the description of the ritual. To perform it, she would have to return to the forest on a full moon night and call out the creature's true name. Only by mastering her fear could she sever her bond with it. "But if you fail," Mrs. Jenkins said, "it will consume your soul forever." Anna swallowed. She had no choice. If she didn't do this, she would live in fear forever. On a full moon night, Anna stood before the stone circle. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the forest. She held the oil lamp and the ancient book, her heart pounding in her chest. "I am not afraid of you," she whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. She stepped into the circle and began to read the ancient inscriptions. Each word was like a knife cutting through the air, and the forest seemed to shake. The mass of darkness slowly emerged, distorted faces contorted in pain. A deep voice rang out, "Do you think you can escape?" Anna took a deep breath and read the creature's true name aloud. Screams rang out, and the mass of darkness recoiled, as if pushed back by an invisible force. She read faster, louder, until the mass of darkness shattered into 1,000 pieces, dissolving into the air. Everything was silent. Anna collapsed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The nightmare is finally over. Dawn broke over Cold Creek. Sunlight filtered through the trees, dispelling the darkness and fear. Anna stood before the cabin, feeling a freedom she had not felt in a long time. Mrs. Jenkins smiled from afar, nodding in satisfaction. The curse had been broken, but the forest remained, hiding its own secrets. And the people of Cold Creek still whispered to each other about what might lie deep within the forest. Mysteries that should never be awakened. Lena Thomas never liked the ocean. Growing up in a coastal town in Maine, she was surrounded by it, but the dark, endless expanse always made her uneasy. Her father used to say that the ocean was alive, that it held memories and secrets far older than mankind. She'd laughed it off as superstition, something meant to scare little kids. But now, at 28, Lena found herself reluctantly boarding a rickety old fishing boat called the Salty Dog, captained by her childhood friend, Mark Jenkins. Ready for some adventure? Mark grinned, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Adventure isn't the word I'd use, Lena muttered, gripping the rusty railing. Why are we even doing this? Mark chuckled. Because it's not every day you get to investigate a sunken town. He was referring to Harrow's End, a small village that had been swallowed by the sea during a freak storm in 1923. The town's remains were only discovered recently, buried under 50 feet of murky water. Rumors swirled about why the storm came out of nowhere and why no one had survived. Some said the town had been cursed. Others believed something darker lay beneath those waves. Today, they planned to dive down and explore it. As they pushed off from the dock, the air grew colder. The wind whispered in Lena's ears, words she couldn't quite understand. Hours later, Lena was geared up and sitting on the edge of the boat, staring at the black water below. "You good?" Mark asked, adjusting his mask. "Sure," she lied, swallowing the lump in her throat. Together, they plunged into the frigid ocean. The world above vanished, replaced by an eerie silence and endless darkness. They descended slowly, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the murky water. After what felt like an eternity, shapes began to emerge. Shadows sharpened into outlines of buildings, homes, a church steeple, even an old clock tower frozen at 3:17. The sunken town lay eerily intact, as if it had been swallowed whole. Lena's heart raced. The water seemed thicker here, oppressive. Her flashlight flickered over the cracked windows of the buildings. There was no sign of life, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Mark gestured toward the town square. They swam forward, their bubbles rising like tiny ghosts. As they rounded a corner, Lena's light caught something in the shadows. Her stomach twisted. Figure. It was standing in the doorway of an old shop, a vague silhouette. She blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but it didn't move. It just stood there, staring. She turned to Mark, panic bubbling in her chest. He hadn't seen it. When she looked back, the figure was gone. They drifted deeper into the town. The water grew colder, and the silence became suffocating. Lena's breathing grew rapid, her heart thudding in her ears. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft and slithering, like a breeze through dead leaves. It was coming from inside her helmet. "Come closer." She froze. Her flashlight trembled in her hand. "Mark," she whispered, but her voice was a faint crackle through the comms. Mark was swimming ahead, inspecting an old well in the center of the town square. He didn't hear her. The whispers grew louder. "Come down, see what we see." She clutched her head, trying to block it out. But the voices pressed in, wrapping around her thoughts like cold tendrils. Then Mark's voice cut through. "Lena, look at this." She forced herself to swim over to him. He was pointing at the well. The stones were covered in strange symbols, etchings that pulsed faintly, like they were alive. "What is this?" Lena whispered. "Don't know," Mark said, "but it looks like." A hand shot out of the well, white and bloated, fingers clawed at Mark's arm. His scream bubbled through the water as he was yanked downward. "Mark!" Lena screamed, grabbing for him, but he disappeared into the darkness below. Panic surged through her veins. She hesitated for a split second before diving in after him. The whispers rose into a frenzy. "Join us! Join us! Join us!" The well was a narrow, suffocating shaft that twisted down into blackness. Lena's flashlight flickered as she descended, the walls closing in around her. The deeper she went, the louder the whispers became. They weren't just in her ears anymore. They were in her mind, her bones vibrating through her very being. Suddenly, the shaft widened, and she emerged into a vast, open chamber beneath the town. The light from her flashlight revealed twisted roots and skeletal remains tangled together in a nightmarish web. In the center of the chamber, Mark floated motionless. Lena swam toward him, tears mixing with the salt water in her mask. She grabbed his shoulder and turned him around. His eyes were open, but they were empty, milky and lifeless. His mouth moved soundlessly. Then, with a sudden jerk, his body twisted unnaturally. His eyes locked onto hers, and from his mouth came a chorus of whispers. "We are many. We are eternal." Lena screamed, bubbles escaping in a rush. She let go of Mark and kicked backward, her lungs burning. The whispers surged around her. Hands, dozens of them, reached from the walls, grasping at her legs, her arms. Faces formed in the gloom, twisted and screaming. She fought with every ounce of strength, clawing her way back toward the shaft, toward the light above. Her vision blurred as she broke through the surface, gasping for air. The sky was gray, the ocean flat and endless. The boat was gone. She spun in the water, desperate, but there was nothing, just an empty horizon. Then she felt it, a cold hand brushing against her ankle. She looked down. The water beneath her was black, swirling. Faces stared up at her, eyes wide with hunger. A voice whispered in her ear, "You can't escape what's beneath." A hand shot up, grabbing her, pulling her down. She screamed as the ocean closed over her head, the surface vanishing into darkness. The whispers welcomed her home. Ashwood, Oregon was the kind of town people forgot existed. The forests were thick, the roads winding, and the fog never seemed to lift. But beneath its charming facade of diners and mom-and-pop shops lay something the locals rarely spoke of, a forgotten tunnel system beneath the town. Ava Reed had grown up in Ashwood. At 17, she knew every back road, every hiking trail, and every piece of town gossip. But the tunnels? They were a whisper among the older folks, a bedtime story for kids who didn't eat their vegetables. At least that's what she thought, until her best friend, Tyler, disappeared. It had been 2 days. No one knew where he'd gone. The police said he might have run away, but Ava didn't buy it. Tyler was curious about everything, and a few days before he vanished, he told her he'd found something strange near the old courthouse basement. "I swear there's a tunnel entrance down there," he'd said, eyes wide with excitement. "We should check it out." Ava had laughed it off, but now he was missing, and his words echoed in her mind. On a cold, misty evening, she decided to look for herself. The old courthouse had been condemned for years. Ivy strangled its walls, and the windows were boarded up. As Ava pushed open the rusted gate, it creaked loud enough to wake the dead. The basement window was partially shattered, the glass jagged. She took a deep breath and slipped through, her boots crunching on debris. The basement was damp and cold, filled with the scent of mildew and rot. Her flashlight beams swept across broken furniture, forgotten files, and shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. Near the far wall, she saw it. A narrow doorway half obscured by old wooden planks. Her heart hammered as she pried the boards away. Behind them lay a stone archway leading into darkness. The air that seeped out was cold and stale. She hesitated, Tyler's voice ringing in her ears. "We should check it out." She stepped inside. The tunnel stretched out before her, the walls rough and damp. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if the tunnel were swallowing the sound. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became, like she was sinking underwater. Her flashlight flickered. She smacked it lightly, and it steadied, but the beam seemed weaker. The darkness pressed closer. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. It didn't sound like words, more like the wind moving through dead trees, but it was rhythmic, deliberate. She called out, her voice trembling. "Tyler!" The whispering stopped. Then came a voice, distant but unmistakable. "Ava!" Her heart leapt. "Tyler, where are you?" "Down here," he said, his voice hollow. "I need help." She broke into a run, the tunnel narrowing and twisting. The shadows deepened, and the walls seemed to close in. Her flashlight beam caught glimpses of things she couldn't comprehend. Deep scratches on the stone, dark stains that looked too much like blood. "Tyler?" she called again, but this time his voice was different, closer and colder. "Why did you come here, Ava?" She skidded to a halt, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "What do you mean?" The whispering returned, louder now, swirling around her like a breeze carrying secrets she didn't want to know. "You shouldn't have come," his voice whispered, now echoing from multiple directions. "Now you're part of it." The flashlight flickered again and went out. Darkness smothered her, thick and complete. Panic surged through her veins. She fumbled with the flashlight, but the whispers grew louder, almost frantic. She could feel the cold breath of something just inches away. Suddenly, a dim light flared ahead, a pale, sickly glow. It illuminated the tunnel just enough for her to see them. Figures. They lined the walls, their eyes wide and hollow, mouths moving in silent whispers. Their skin was pallid, stretched tight over their bones, and their fingers twitched like broken marionettes. One of them stepped forward. It was Tyler, but his eyes were empty, and his mouth curved into a smile that didn't belong to him. "Ava," he whispered, his voice layered with others. "Stay with us." Her legs refused to move. The figures edged closer, their whispers rising to a frenzied chorus. Cold fingers brushed her arms, her neck. The air stank of decay. Somewhere deep inside, survival instincts kicked in. She tore away from their grasp and bolted back down the tunnel. The whispers rose into wails, echoing behind her, promising that she could never truly leave. The entrance was a pale rectangle in the distance. She pushed herself harder, lungs burning, the icy air clawing at her throat. A hand closed around her ankle. She screamed and kicked, breaking free. She scrambled through the archway and back into the basement, the darkness of the tunnel snarling behind her. She shoved the wooden planks back over the entrance, her hands shaking. The whispers faded, but they didn't disappear. The police found nothing. No tunnel, no figures, no Tyler. The courthouse basement was sealed again, the entrance buried beneath new concrete. But Ava knew the truth. She heard the whispers every night, just beyond the edge of sleep. Sometimes, she caught glimpses of pale figures in the corners of her vision, mouths moving soundlessly. And sometimes, she saw Tyler's empty eyes staring at her from the shadows. She left Ashwood a month later, but she never escaped, because once the tunnels knew your name, they never forgot, and the whispers always found their way back.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.